Doing a little woodworking today with the RYOBI planer, thickness planer that is. We'll be right back. I'm Tim Johnson. You're watching Shop Tool Reviews. This is the RYOBI AP1305 12.5 inch thickness planer. Basically we can cut up to or plane up to 12.5 inch wide stock. Feed as long as you want to through there, but as far as the width, it's 12.5 inches wide and it will go as high as 6 inches tall. Now there's some pretty cool features on that, especially for being an entry-level thickness planer. Now used to have a thickness planer, you were typically a full-blown woodworking shop. Well now, with the pricing RYOBI has on that, that's not the case anymore. Pretty good entry-level pricing. We'll cover that after we do the testing. Let's first dive into the features. We'll look at all the cool things on this thickness planer, then we'll use it, then we'll come back and we'll tell you what we thought about it, as well as tell you about pricing and warranty as well. This is the RYOBI AP1305. It is a thickness planer. This is their 12.5 inch thickness planer. Really, it's their only thickness planer. The 12.5 inches, that's basically the width of the cutting head. So that's going to be the widest piece of material you can feed through. In fact, they recommend not actually pushing those boundaries too much, at least with too large of pieces. So anyway, the maximum you're going to do width-wise is 12.5 inches, and it will go as high as 6 inches. Now that's as high as the cutting blade will raise, so that's how much you can plane as a 6 inch slab. Anything over that, you're not going to be planing, but I would imagine if you're doing that thick of slabs, then you're probably going to be going to a larger planer anyway. This is a 10,000 RPM, 15 amp motor. It does use a basically two single blades. It's really double-sided blades, but it's not utilizing both sides of those blades. That's just for maintenance. You can flip those around. We'll show you the blades here in a moment, but basically two cutting blades that are spinning on the drum, and then you have a rubber feed roller as well that will help feed the wood or feed the material through as you're cutting. Now we have these fold-out tables, and that is one of the things that need to be addressed immediately when you get it out of the box before you use it, as well as really before each use. If you're folding this up and storing this away, which a lot of times with something like this you are, because you're trying to save space, you may not use this all the time, then each time you pull it out, you need to do some just some general maintenance here on the deck as far as adjusting the in feed and the out feed to make sure that we're on the same plane as the table inside here. What you see in there is a very polished piece of, I would imagine that's stainless. It doesn't look like aluminum, so we've got a piece of polished stainless in there that's got really a mirror finish that allows you to actually see the cutter blade in the roller, as well as to smoothly push the wood across. We have a switch here that's got a locking feature built into the switch, so we can flip that on. That's going to be on once we're powered up or once we're plugged in. That's going to be off. So you can easily, if it's on and you have a problem, you can easily bump that and knock that off without having to actually look at it. You can just push it and we know we're off. Now if you want to lock that off, you can pull the yellow piece out, and now the switch is basically disengaged and it's not going to operate anything. To repower that, obviously just push that back in, and now we've got our switch back. The motor is a brushed motor, and in fact you can see where the brushes are right here. So I think they recommend every 10 to 15 hours of use time. Pull the brushes out, replace those, but very easy to get to right there with a straight slot screwdriver to be able to pull that out and replace those brushes. We also have a reset switch right up here on top of the machine. If we trip that 15 amp breaker or 15 amp internal circuit breaker, then we can just push that button and be back off to the races. You see, as I'm turning this handle, that's going to adjust the depth of our cut, or the actual max depth of the finished material we're going to get. So if I crank this counterclockwise, it's going to go down. If I crank it clockwise, it's going to go up. We also have an indicator here. Now this should basically tell you what the finished material is going to be. There's a good chance that this could come out of calibration, and you can adjust that by loosening these screws here and just fine adjusting that blade.
Had a little mic malfunction here, so I'll be doing a little voiceover for the next minute or so. We're talking about the dust extraction port here. Very important on a machine like this because you'll have chips everywhere if you're not using any dust extraction. And with the two 7mm Allen head screws on the backside, you can mount this to where the extraction port either aims out to the left or flip it over and it will aim out the right. So depending on which side you need it on, you can easily flip that over just by removing those screws and flipping it over and aiming it the other way. It has a nice foam pad around the front side of it to seal it very well. And not only is it extracting the dust and chunks from the blade, but also it's pulling through the motor. There's a port up there as well, keeping that motor cool also. And the onboard 7mm Allen wrench, very easy to grab to tighten and loosen these screws. And by the way, pretty much all the screws you'll access to any of the covers or anything are going to be that 7mm Allen head there. Not only do you have the Allen head that's on board there, you also have these two magnets, and what they are for is actually removing the blade, so you don't have to touch that sharp blade. When we get inside there, we'll show you that, where we can use these magnets to pull up not only the blade but the actual blade cover, and there will be two of those. And by the way, each blade is double-sided, so you have a blade on each side that you can flip over basically to not just replace the blades, but to flip them over and maintain it for a longer time, keeping those blades sharp by rotating them. So we're going to take this dust extraction port back off, and then that's going to expose the cover for the blade cover, or expose the blade cover, which is where these tools sit on. And again, using that same Allen wrench, we're going to back out these two 7mm screws, and will give us access to that cutting blade and the cutting blade head, to where we can access those and pull those blades out, and we'll show you that here in just one moment.
So here's our cutting head, and it's locked into place. This little red switch over there is what locks out this cutter head, and it locks it into place. And there's a little piece of foam here that's pretty much hiding that actual cutter, so you can't cut your finger, or at least mitigate the possibility of you cutting your finger. And this little red tab right here, which gets depressed when we put the cover back on and freeze this up. So you see, if you need to manually roll this, you can push this red tab back, and now we can roll this blade, and there you see that cutting blade. And if I turn this over, there's the other cutting blade right there. So we have two blades, and these are double-sided, by the way, for you to be able to, and you hear that click into place. So I can roll this back, and you'll hear it, and you'll see this lock click in. There you go. So now it's locked in. Again, 7mm Allen head. Take our magnets here, lift that cover off, and then turn this back, and again use our magnets and pick up the blade. So now we don't have to touch that blade, and as I mentioned, you see there's a double side to that, to where after we use that and we get a nick in it, or just over time we want to keep swapping those back and forth, we can do so. And we have little dowels right here that indexes those blades into place. Get a little bit of shift from one side to the other. So I can kind of center that up. And then our cover goes into place. And then we can put our 7mm Allen heads back in there, hex heads, whatever you want to call them. There we go. Now right inside here, you'll see when I actually turn this and that table's dropping, there's a threaded rod that's turning right here. And there's an equal rod on the other side that's turning as well, that's making sure that this table is dropping level and rising level depending on which way that I'm turning this. So it's not just one single threaded rod that's raising and lower this. There's 2 threaded rods that are raising this up and down. You also have 4 different posts where this is riding on as well to keep this nice and true. We also have 4 holes in the base to be able to bolt this down. If you make a table, maybe even build an infeed and outfeed table to extend kind of the infeed and outfeed, you can bolt this down with lag bolts, or you can bolt it through some 3/4 inch material or whatever you're bolting it to, or you can clamp it down as well. Now, one of the things you need to do when you first get this, as I was mentioned, is lower the feed table, so the front side and the back side, and lower that down. And you want to make sure that this is on the same plane. I've said that a couple of times now. And you can do that by getting a straight piece of metal. You can use a contractor square. In this case, I'm using a level. And then a feeler gauge is good, or you can look for light underneath it, shine a light from behind it, what have you. But you want to make sure that the feeler gauge, and I've got an 0.008 feeler gauge here, it's hitting right here, and it's actually hitting right there too. So that's actually set up really well on this table, and yeah, I'm hitting right here as well. So if you've got any where it's actually going through, then we need to adjust. So it's going under just a touch there, hitting there, hitting there. So I'm a little bit low right there. I'm going to raise this up, 2 10mm wrenches, and what I need to do, I'm hitting right here, so really I need to lower this front edge. So I'm going to drop this down just a touch, so I can take my bottom nut and I can turn it just a touch, and then clamp it back down, and then I can check that again. And so now I'm good. I'm hitting here, I'm hitting here, and I'm hitting here. So I'm on a nice even plane, and then I want to check all 4 corners. So each side of this table and each side of the other table, and check it here too. And that's going to tell you of whether or not you need to lower or raise the feed table. There's no adjustment on the inside table here, just on the outside feed tables. All right, so I have a piece of 1-inch oak that will plane down here for our first go at this. So I'm going to put it in here, and you can see it pretty much goes straight through. So I'm going to gently lower this down till I make contact with the wood. So right there. Now, here's the thing. Each complete revolution of this is 1/16 of an inch. So right there, I just raised it a 1/16. So right there, I'm contacting with the wood. So I'm starting to hit the roller there. So right here, I'm starting to contact the wood, starting to hit the roller. So I'm going to take off another 1/16 of an inch. I'm going to do 1 full revolution. Okay, so that should be able to take off a 1/16 of an inch. And this over here says that we should be real close to 3/4 of an inch when we're through. So this is not quite 1 inch. So we're going to hook up our dust extraction. And by the way, on this, you're looking at, for external is basically a 2-inch, and internal, I believe, is 1 7/8 or 1 3/4, something like that, 1/8/6. So here we go. By the way, our rigid shop vac fits perfectly on that port. Imagine that. So let's turn on our vacuum, our dust extraction. There we go. Now we'll turn on our machine. So this is just as it came out. I really don't see any sniping at the beginning or the end. Most of the time when you see your sniping, that'll be at the very beginning of the cut or at the end, which they recommend that when you're doing woodworking that you basically do your thickness planing on longer pieces and then cut your ends off, and you know you're going to cut all your snipes out. And that happens when you're first feeding it in, the roller's grabbing it. A lot of times it'll feed up into the cutter head, as well as when it's coming out do the same thing. So a lot of times you'll see that sniping at the beginning and at the end. And also you can eliminate a lot of times that by putting pieces back to back and feeding those through, and that'll help mitigate or almost eliminate that sniping effect. So let's crank this down another turn. So another 1/16 of an inch, and let's feed this back through. In fact, I'm going to do 2 turns, which is the max, which is the 1/8 inch that we're taking off. Okay, we definitely heard a different sound that time, and you could tell it's kind of taxing the motor to take off that full 1/8 inch, even though it did a great job, and I feel a little bit of sniping right here. So I feel that cup effect. There's probably a ridge right there. I may be able to get that show up here in a second, and a little bit right there as well. I don't feel it through here. It did a great job cutting that, but I do feel that sniping effect right there. So that'll give you an idea. I've got that ridge right here. So that's how much of that board I would need to cut off to cut that out, or do a lot of sanding on it. But the more you cut out, the more you're going to have that sniping effect happen. And by the way, you'll find that on just about any thickness planer. It's really not showing up. Sometimes yep, there it is. You can see this line right here that I got it to show up by putting a little lead on it, little graphite. And you can see that snipe effect all the way through here. It's very slight. I can feel it with my finger, and I get it to show up there with my pencil as well. But let's just cut a 1/16 off, and let's see if it won't take that out of there. No, we still got it in there. In fact, you can actually see it right here on this without putting any lead on it whatsoever. That ridge running right there. This side not so bad. Now let's do a 1/2 crank on it, and we'll go again. It's definitely not near as bad, but I am feeling that snipe on either end. And again, you're looking at probably about 2 inches on either side that you'd need to cut out of this board to get rid of that sniping effect. But again, that's pretty typical on a thickness planer unless you're using a very high dollar, special cutting head, helix head. Anyway, cuts really well, leaves a nice finish. So I'm not feeling any little small divots or anything else that's through this board. It's nice and smooth. I just have the sniping there on each end. All right, now I have 2 pieces of, I believe this is poplar if I'm not mistaken, and so I'm going to feed this through, still about a little more than 3/4 of an inch, and let's see how this does. Going to go another 1/2 turn. Okay, it really wasn't taking much off until I did those 2 1/2 turns and finally got to start taking some off. And doing a good job. Again, I'm starting to feel that sniping effect. I'm not surprised by that, but I'm just letting you know that you will notice that, so be able to plan for that. If you're doing woodworking, you understand that already, but there is that sniping effect that I can feel right here and right here. But as far as the cut, it's leaving a nice and even cut. Let's go another half a crank and go again. Yeah, this feels really nice. No sniping effect here, but definitely in on this end. I think this was the side that fed in first. Let's flip this over, give it another half a turn, and let's take some off. Now that feels really nice through there. Definitely on the feed side, I'm getting more sniping. I may be able to adjust my table. I didn't fine tune that front feed table, I don't believe, before we started, so it might be out just a touch. But as far as the finish it's leaving, it feels really nice. Very little sanding to be done to finish that off. And then finally, I've got a piece of ash, a piece of white ash here, a lot thicker stock here. Let's go up. So that was an excellent example of what a thickness planer can do. You saw the first couple to 3 passes, all we were getting. The first time, I don't know we got any contact at all except right here on the front edge. So it was definitely thicker down here on this end. After like the second and third pass, we started cutting about this much and then about this much. And finally, I think that either third or fourth pass, we finally made contact across this whole board. Now we have co-planar planes. So basically we have a plane here and a plane here that are parallel to one another. So they're what I would call co-planar. And now we've got a smooth surface here. Now I can flip this over, get the other side, and we've got a nice parallel surfaces that are also smooth. I'm going to give this a crank. Okay, we made contact across the whole piece. So now we've got a nice, even 2 planes that are parallel with a very smooth surface on both. A little sniping right here on this end. I think that was the feed end. This is the feed coming out. Not bad whatsoever. In fact, I can't feel it at all. But on this side, I can feel it because that's the part we fed in. So a little bit of sniping with it, but not bad whatsoever. As far as the cutting of the head, does very well. I would definitely say stick with that 1/16 inch or less of a cut, especially doing hardwoods. Your max is going to be 1/8 of an inch, but I'd stay away from that because you're going to get a worse cut, a worse finish, if you will. So you're going to get that lot better finish by taking off a 32nd or 16th of an inch and kind of easing up on it rather than trying to take it all at once. As you saw in the testing, did a great job at actually planing the wood. Yes, there was some sniping going on. We totally expected that. Again, if you're aware of any type of woodworking stuff, you're probably aware of that term anyway, and that typically happens on a thickness planer. Now, a lot of times if you have a $20,000 thickness planer, you may not see that in different types of cutting heads and feed rollers and that sort of thing, longer in-feed and out-feed tables. But for a portable thickness planer, you're typically going to have a little bit of that sniping on the front and on the back. This one's mostly on the front side. You can almost eliminate it on the out-feed side. So you probably can mitigate a lot of it, but just know you want to be planing the longer material so you can come back and cut that down. So don't make your length cuts before you actually plane the material. But as far as the actual cut through the wood, nice and smooth. Didn't notice any divots. Again, not a lot of sniping other than the end and the beginning, so nothing here through the middle. Cuts very, very nice. As far as being able to get to the cutter head, very easy to do so. Dust extraction was very well. Yeah, we had some residual lying around, but not a lot whatsoever. So the dust extractor, the vacuum, and we were just using a cheap, $100 Home Depot rigid shop vac hooked up to the dust extractor or to the dust extraction port, and we were pulling the large majority of those chips and sawdust away from the machine and away from the user. So we did have some residual floating around, but not a lot. Now let's look at the price of this, $329. I think it's normally like $369, but right now we saw it on HomeDepot.com for $329, and you get a 3-year warranty. So again, you may see it at the regular price, which is $369, which is still not a bad price because you're able to get a thickness planer now in your shop. And listen, these aren't just for that woodworking shop anymore. Many people who are building jigs, fabricators, things like that, see the use, even interior components and doing things like that. They really see the use of a thickness planer, and you can really, with this one, fold it up, store it out of the way. When you need it, bring it back down, bring it back out. Make sure your in-feed and outfield are kind of dialed in. And you've got an easy way to make those equal planes or those parallel planes on your board so they're nice and flat. By the way, if you've got a twist in a board, this is really not the machine to do that, but there are some tricks on how you can make that flat again, but we won't cover that right now, but maybe in another episode we'll show you how to do that. Anyway, so check it out for yourself. It's the RYOBI AP1305, $369 from the Home Depot or online at HomeDepot.com. Also, keep track of us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Hey, if you don't mind, would you hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already? And by the way, if you hated our video, give us a thumbs down. But would you let us know in the comments why? Have a great day and keep smiling.